day and welcome to the Directors Dialogue, the official podcast of the Chartered Institute of Directors, Nigeria. I'm delighted to have you here. The Directors Dialogue is a thought leadership platform designed to engage directors, founders, and senior executives around meaningful conversations on governance, business, and excellence. It also serves as a bridge connecting experienced and emerging leaders on policymakers with global partners. Today, we're going to be discussing a very important topic, and this episode is special. It is a collaboration between the Chartered Institute of Directors and Coronation Trustees Limited. The Chartered Institute of Directors was established in 1983 and became chartered in 2023 by the CIoD Act. It is a premier professional body for directors, business leaders in Nigeria committed to advancing governance, leadership, and development. Coronation Trustees Limited is a subsidiary of the Coronation Group, licensed by the Securities and Exchange Commission with deep expertise in trust administration, estate planning, corporate and public trust services. Together, the institutions have combined to provide governance, leadership, and financial expertise to deliver insightful, relevant, and practical conversations for today's business environment. For today's conversation, we're going to be exploring an important but often misunderstood topic, the estate planning dilemma, will versus trust. What is the best fit? So we're going to look at the key differences between wills and trust, critical succession planning considerations for business owners, how to protect and transfer wealth effectively, and the role of trustees in long-term asset governance. If you're a business leader, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a founder, today's topic is going to interest you as we talk about legacy, we talk about the future, and how you can transfer wealth effectively. My guests today are two experts from the Coronation Trustee Limited. First, I have Adele Balogun, who is the head of trust services at Coronation Trustees Limited. He is experienced and has worked with fiduciary services in a professional setting with core expertise in security trusteeship, escrow services, estate planning, and capital market transactions. He leads the team with trust structuring, transaction execution, and client advisory for corporate and private trust engagements. I also have with me Feintola Da Silva, who is a trust advisor. She is also a member of the Coronation Trustee Limited group team. She's an author. She specializes in structuring fiduciary solutions for individuals and institutions with a focus on estate planning, asset protection, and corporate trust services, helping clients preserve wealth and ensure continuity across generations. And I'm your host for today. My name is Ibukun Oshoba. I'm a lawyer, I'm a corporate governance professional, and I'm also a member of the Chartered Institute of Directors. We welcome you to our conversation today. Sit back, have a coffee, have a drink, and let's discuss how you can effectively transfer and maintain your assets across generations. So welcome, Adele and welcome, Faye, to this conversation. Very important and timely as well. So I believe that one of the things people think about when they hear trust and will is end of life. I'm not dying anytime soon. I don't need to address this matter. So can you tell us in simple terms, what is a trust, what is a will, and what are the differences between the two?
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be here. So in simple terms, a will basically is a legal document that states how your assets should be distributed upon a person's passing, right? While a trust is a legal structure that holds and manages your assets. So in reference to the difference, right, I would say the major difference is that a will takes effect after the passing of the person, right? But with a trust, that's not the case. You can set up a trust and still maintain one while still alive. So that's the major difference.
Okay, that's great. So Adele, if I'm a business owner, if I'm a high net worth individual, in practical terms, is a will enough, or should I be thinking about a trust?
So basically, for individuals, the basic question when you're trying to plan your estate is to determine what the goals are, what the objectives are, what you seek to achieve from it, right? So, for instance, if you have assets that they are not so large in size, if your goal is to ensure that you just want to distribute the assets to various individuals, you don't care about what happens after each and every one of your beneficiaries get the assets, right? You can opt for a will, right? But if you're looking for art structure, if you're looking for structure, if you're looking for clarity, if you're looking for assets that if you're looking for how the assets are going to be managed effectively even after distributing it to the beneficiaries, right? You should be considering setting up a trust. And the reason being that trust is all about structure, right? Structure being that you can use your trust to do myriads of things. Your trust could contain succession planning in terms of your business. Your trust could ensure that even whilst your assets, right, are being distributed to beneficiaries, right, the trustee can also hold those assets, right, and ensure that the asset lives for so long even after you. So it means that let's assume, for instance, you have a house that you want to pass to your beneficiaries, right? What happens is that, but you want to ensure that the house are not being sold, right? A trust is an effective way to ensure that that those your wishes are well honored and respected. So it could be that you just want all the benefits and the rental income to go to your beneficiaries and not necessarily them selling the house, right? What will happen is that you move the house into the trust. The rental income moves to the trust account. The trustee in turns administers and distributes those the rental income to the beneficiaries,
Sure.
thereby ensuring that your wishes are well respected.
Okay, amazing. Very amazing. So, Fanny, at what stage in the life of a business does estate planning move from optional to absolutely critical?
I would say it's these three stages, right? It can be either or, right? So if your assets that you've gathered are meaningful, right? And if you plan on gathering more assets, if you have people who you love that are dependent on you, and if the business in question is dependent on your leadership. So I think it has moved from being what's it called? Optional
To
to
critical.
critical.
Okay. So for a lot of directors that are listening, I think it's important to understand that number one, a will and a trust are not conflicting instruments. They sort of go hand in hand when you're planning. And it's just to think about, look, it's financially wise. It's important for us to, consider both. And also, where wills may not be able to specify, this is how we want the business to continue. When you're trying to preserve your business multi-generation, which is the hope for many businesses, a trust is, a very great instrument. I'd say for Adelekon, in Nigeria, we have, this new tax regime that just came, and everybody and their brothers and sisters are talking about it. The government is coming into my bank account to take my money. I mean, some companies have come out to say, look, our profits are going to be wiped out with this new tax regime. How does a trust help businesses, navigate this new, climate?
So I think the new tax law and everything, right? I think it's a dilemma, right?
Yes.
It's a dilemma in the sense that as good citizens of the country, obviously we're supposed to pay our taxes, right?
Yes.
And whilst but there are effective ways in which we can try to optimize the business, right? So, for instance, when you're planning your estate and the likes, right? There's the inheritance tax that everybody pays when your assets goes through wills and goes through probate and the likes, right? But there are effective ways in which you can now try to optimize the tax system, right? So it means that you're able to reduce the impact of taxation that you would pay, right? So that would depend on the type of structure that has been put in place, right?
Mhm.
So, for instance, if you set up a trust and the trust is for charitable objectives, you don't necessarily need to pay taxes for those for those type of structures. It means that
Yes.
at the end of the day, because the trust basically is undergoing is a charitable based trust, right? So you will not necessarily pay taxes because there's not income being generated from the trust, right? So, but for incomes that's been generated, the applicable taxes that you're supposed to pay would be paid, right? And for most times when you're moving cash assets into the trust, right? because for some of the income that come into the trust, they've been taxed at source. So, for
Yes.
instance, your personal income has been taxed at source. So, when you move those assets into the trust, if taxing those assets will amount to double taxation. So, because they've been taxed at source, all you have to do is provide them adequate or sufficient evidence to show that, oh, this particular income had already been taxed, right? So the other taxation that would now apply in this case would be probably those funds now are now being invested, right? So the normal withholding tax will now come into place.
Okay. So when we talk about, managing taxes and we talk about business effectively being managed and assets, for business continuity, how does a trust versus a will come into play? So I want my business to continue. I want the wealth of my generation to continue. So I don't just want to say, oh, I have 10 houses and I'm passing it to my kids. I want some type of legacy for 2, 3, 4 generations. How does, this work?
Okay, so I think it's all about structure, right? So whilst a will gives directives, explains how assets should be distributed and the likes, right? The trust gives you structure, it gives you clarity, and ensures that breaks down complexities for you. So reason being that in your trust arrangements, right, you are even able to decide how you want the business outlook for the next 5-7 years, right? Under your trust arrangement, you via the trust you are able to decide, what happens when this happens. Example being that you can easily say in your trust that, when this country achieves this, when this company achieves this milestone, this is the next step they should take, right? This is the line of succession planning. This is the next managing director. This is the next board chairman. This is everything, right? You are able to. That's if it's a private company. So public companies are governed by the corporate governance. So while there's corporate governance across all companies, right? But the regulations that governs public or PLC, right? It's different from the governance of private company. But if for a family business, a privately owned company, right, you are able to put structures in place into how you want the succession plan of the company to be. You're able to know, what happens when this happens? What is the next step? What is next? Just the way a company has the outlook, the 5-year plan, the 5-year outlook and plan, right? You are able to use a trust, right, to put structures into place to ensure that your legacy lives forever.
Okay, I like that because, again, we've had so many businesses start and end with one founder. And as someone who enjoys corporate governance, one of the big things for corporate governance is succession planning. So it's also an effective way to say, look, succession planning means that my firstborn doesn't want this job. There's somebody else that can take it and somebody else that can take it. Okay, so can you talk to us about real life situations? What do you see is the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to managing their family expectation, conflicts, and complexities when it comes to, estate planning?
I would say the biggest mistake, right, or the biggest mistakes, right, they're majorly two, which is number one, planning your estate till the last minute, right? You don't know the future, right? And number two, using emotions to appoint who would manage your assets. So those two are the biggest mistakes.
So if I may add again, I think another mistake is that people think that their assets are too small, so they don't need to plan their estates. But the bottom line is that at every point in time, if you have dependents, right, that you know that, you need to take a deep reflection and say, if something happens to me today, right, do I have a proper plan in place for my beneficiaries and my loved ones not to suffer? So it's not about the wealth now. So because you would see families of the wealthy ones, right, suffering after the demise of their breadwinner, right? So it's not because of lack of money, it's because the proper structure and the proper plan has not been put in place. So if you have beneficiaries that depend on you, if you are the breadwinner, you actually need to start planning your estate.
Okay, that's amazing because, Adedika, I was going to ask you, do I need to be on the Forbes list before I start thinking about a trust? Because, when we hear trust fund and trust, we just think this person has a lot of money. We're not talking to me. I think something you could also talk about, is for people who may not even be business owners per se. You've talked about it if you have any type of asset. So I'm a high-level executive. I use maybe my pension to say, you know what, I want to save a lot of money through my pension. How can people also think about, look, trusts, can be used? Are there types of trust that people can explore? I'm alive. I still want to have some access to my trust or to my assets rather. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, so there are different type of trust structures you can put in place depending on your needs, right? So for instance, if you're alive right now, you can set up a living trust, right? It's a settlor directed trust that you're able to be in full charge and control of the trust. There's a governance document, which is the trust deed, which outlines the relationship between the individual setting up the trust that is regarded as the settlor, the corporate trustee holding those trust assets in trust, right, and the beneficiaries to the trust. So in a living trust structure, you would ordinarily see that the settlor is the primary beneficiary, and there are multiple named secondary beneficiaries at every point in time, right? So the trust deed outlines the relationship, outlines the assets that has been moved into the trust, outlines what happens in the case of eventuality of the settlor, right? So the settlor during their lifetime are able to make use of the trust, they're able to do myriads of things that they want. You can always make third-party payments from the trust. You can pay for your flight tickets from the trust. So you just see your trustee as, so to say, like your butler, right? It helps you do whatever you need to do, right? So you've passed your responsibility to the trustee to hold your assets on your behalf, to administer them in line with your instructions, right? So your instruction is king, right? And the governance document, which is the trust deed, right, now ensures that your instructions even passes, your instruction is key, binding, and even after your demise, right, your instruction still holds ground to ensure that the assets being put in trust seamlessly moved to the beneficiaries without hindrance. And that is I think that is one of the most key importance and the key function of a trust, right? So, whilst we say wills, we say trust, there are forms of estate planning, right? But for a trust, right, the thing is that the chain of reaction does not stop, right? So, for instance, in a will, if an individual is trying to pass their assets using a will, right, upon death, something happens, everything stops, right? It means that if they've not paid their children's school fees for 5 years, right, it means that pending the time when they get the grant of probate to execute the will, and assets are now being transferred from their bank accounts to the estate accounts before the cash stops, right? If the family does not have a backup funds, right, it means that everything grants are out to a halt. School fees are not being paid. House rent are not being paid. People are not able to access funds because they don't have it, right? But for trust, nothing stops, right? Even upon death, their instructions are already been laid down. As long as the trust account is funded, nothing ever stops.
I like that. And if I'm thinking about, now you've won me over. So you've won me over now. I have a few assets. I'm going to try and set up a trust. But you know what? I want my sister to be my trustee. How do I decide who is going to be my trustee, and how does that dynamic work? How does the actual setting up of a trust work?
Okay, so the way a trust arrangement is, right, it means that there's a settlor, there's a trustee, there's a beneficiary, and there's a trust asset. So the individual setting up the trust is the settlor.
Okay.
The individual or corporate entity holding to which the assets are being moved to is the trustee.
Okay.
The beneficiaries could be the individuals that have been named that are going to benefit from the trust assets.
Okay.
The settlor could be one of the beneficiaries, could be the sole beneficiary, and there could be multiple beneficiaries under the trust arrangements. Then the trust assets are those assets that are being moved into the trust to be managed by the trustee, right? So whilst private trust is not regulated, or anybody can decide to be a trustee, right? But there's a caveat to it, right? So number one is that we've seen instances where people want to transfer their assets using a will, right? And they've appointed executors, right?
Yes.
They've appointed various individuals and all. But what happens is that you never can tell, like they said that that you never can tell how a person will behave when you're not there, right?
Yeah.
So when you appoint an individual as your trustee, right, there are various dangers, there are various pitfalls that could happen. Number one is that they might not even carry your instructions to the letter because there's nobody to regulate them, right? So you might tell them do A and they do C, and then probably it will take the grace of God, right? And because of how the trust arrangement is, right, because you actually have to move those assets to a trustee. right? So it might even be that your families get nothing because they have the legal ownership once you move those assets to them, right? So that's why it's usually advisable to go with a corporate trustee. Number one is that they are licensed, they are regulated, they can't act outside the scope of their service because they know that they can be sanctioned by the regulatory agency, right? And because they have no skin in the game, they have no residual interest, they are able to carry your instructions to the letter, right? And but people now often ask again that, oh, but how am I even sure that? So what if probably they are being influenced? Apart from the fact that because they're professionals, they are not to be influenced, right? But there's a particular clause in the trust deed too, which is called a protector clause. So that clause allows the settlor to name another trusted individual to ensure that. So the protector is like a watchdog that watches over the affairs or the day-to-day dealings of the trustee when the settlor is no longer available. So whilst the trust protector has no power to alter the provisions of the trust deed, has no power to alter the instructions of the settlor, right? His sole role is just to ensure that the trustee acts according to the governance document, which is the trust deed. So, in summary, right, the best approach when setting up a trust is to use a corporate trustee. And the reason being that they are licensed, they have no skin in the game, and they would carry your instructions to the letter.
Okay, I really like the fact that you've talked about being licensed. So this is a Securities and Exchange Commission licensed organization. There's law backing you. There's law backing what you've set up. I really like that. Can you just talk to us a little about wills? So for wills, we're not saying that there's anything wrong with them, but how do they fall short? I know that Adelekun has mentioned a lot of the benefits, but if you could just reiterate to us, how can a will fall short where a trust is not going to, do the same thing?
Okay, so I like the fact that you said that wills are in itself efficient, right?
Yes.
Because that's the case, right? But then, excuse me. So in the case of if your estate, for instance, is simple, then a will would do justice to it. But if your estate is complex, if you have complex family dynamics as well, if your wealth is fragmented, right? I think in these areas, a will may fall short. Also in the terms of privacy, right? Because when your will passes through probate, right, it is up for public records, right? So things like privacy is off the table. That is why a trust is recommended in the area of privacy. Also, wills can be it can be contested, right? But a trust is hardly ever contested because the person is alive. So how's that possible? So I think these are the areas that I know.
Amazing.
Oh, and if I may add to whilst we've spoken about all the benefits of trust, right? To have a robust estate plan, you actually need both a trust and a will.
Perfect.
And the reason being that there are some assets that you can't move into a trust. You can't move your bank accounts, you can't move your pension, RSA balances into a trust. So you actually need a will to transfer your interest in your bank accounts and your RSA balances.
To that. It's perfect. I'm really enjoying this conversation because, again, we're in Nigeria. I talk to a lot of people, high net worth individuals, and people are just super worried about thinking about planning. It's almost like in their minds, if I sit down to write my will or plan a trust, I'm thinking about how I will go. Or people can even say from Nigerian movies, people would say, then this one will find out that this is for them and then come and take me out. Whereas we can think about this as like strategic moves to build and grow wealth. So Faye, while we're still on the topic, to my amazing, listeners today, what would you say can be done? So I've done nothing. I want to start from scratch. Whether I am in my 30s or in my 60s, what is the first step that I should be thinking about and what should I avoid when I'm thinking about estate planning?
Okay, so first things first, you need to know your assets. You need to understand your assets. And then you need to know what your goals are. And then the next step is to call us. So those two steps, I think what to avoid is delay, right? I'm thinking that there's still time. So I think those are the two things I'll say.
Okay. Adelekun, I want to talk about a business. So let's say, okay, as an individual, I'm a senior executive, I've now, taken the step. How can businesses, whether family owned or generally owned, use a trust as a tool for managing their assets or preserving wealth, or like you said, succession planning, and just at the end of the day, we're trying to grow wealth beyond multiple generations?
Yeah, so thank God you mentioned senior executives and people that have worked for so long. So, for every stage of human growth, right? You have the accumulation stage, that's the hustle stage, where you try to accumulate wealth here and there, here and there, here and there. Then there are times when you now have to consolidate it. So after consolidation, you now need to preserve your wealth, then you now need to transfer the wealth, right? For corporates, you see every point in time, you see corporate organizations, they need additional working capital, they want to go to the markets, they want to do this, they want to do that, right? Depending on the type of the capital raise, right? So if it's a bank loan, you can always have a trustee, right? You can move your assets into the trust, use that same asset, right, as collateral to various facilities without necessarily needing to take your collateral to the lender. What happens is that in the security trust structure, the trustee holds those assets, notes the interest of the various lenders at every point in time, right? And then your assets can still continue to grow and work for you, right? Okay. And also, at every point in time, you appoint the trustees, right? Generally, right? We act as trustees to various SEC-regulated transactions. So you're talking about bonds, you're talking about corporate bonds, talking about public bonds, talking about mutual funds. At every point in time, you have the trustee. And whilst it might appear, right, that the role of trustee changes based on transaction, right, but what is always paramount and what is always constant is that the trustee holds assets, administers the assets, ensures that the interests of beneficiaries are well protected in accordance with the law.
Okay, that's great. So you're basically telling me that when I'm using a corporate trustee especially, I can get benefits of sort of wealth management as well as asset protection at the same time. That's great. Can you give us, for practical reasons, are there examples of people who, are using trust effectively in today's that I can look at and say, okay, I like the way this person is, running this?
Okay, so because trust, right, is very confidential and it's very private, right? So you would hardly see you hardly know, right? But there's some certain trust structures that probably have come into the public places due to probably conflicts and the likes, right? So for instance, and upon passing to, you will definitely know that somebody has a will or a trust, because now you have to distribute this and this and that and that. But a classical example could be the Robert Murdoch case, right?
Okay.
So he has a family trust that has specified how he wants his both News Corp and Fox News to run over time, right? So the trust is so structured in a way that even in terms of succession, who manages this company and all, right, has been specified in the trust structure and is an irrevocable trust. So a trust could be revocable or it could be irrevocable. So the difference between that is the modes of operation. So for a revocable trust, it means that at every point in time during the lifetime of the settlor, so it's called a revocable living trust, the settlor can at every point in time amend certain clauses, amend beneficiaries, save and replace beneficiaries at every point in time, right? Without without the knowledge or without needing the consent of the beneficiaries, right? But if it's an irrevocable trust, before you amend some certain clauses, you actually need the consent of the beneficiaries before you're able to amend the clauses in the trust deed, right? So in terms of trust structures and in terms of people that set up family trust in the past, right? What happens is that trust creates effectiveness, ensures structure, ensures clarity, and for business, right, it is actually the most effective succession plan for succession tool for your businesses, because everything is well structured, and everybody knows where to go, what happens, and everybody knows where to go, what happens, and in the case of eventuality, right, the roadmap is already there for all to see.
Okay, so just as in closing, Fanny, do you have any advice for our directors, our leaders, or anyone that is listening today what's the one advice that they can go away with?
I would say protect your loved ones. If you have loved ones, protect them. If you have a business that you've worked so hard to build, protect it. That's all I'll say.
And Adeleko, any final words from you as well?
So I think if you're thinking about setting up a trust or a will, right? I think the steps are simple. It is not cumbersome, right? The first step is that you have to take a stock of what you own. It means that you have to now and that is why you have to take a stock of what you own. You have to put everything into writing, look at what you have, decide who gets what, when and how, right? And after that, you need to consult a professional, right, to help you. So, but within you, depending on your asset structure, your asset class, you would know whether you need a will or a trust or you need both, right? So after you've decided whether you need a will or a trust, you can contact Coronation Trustees, who will help you structure a robust estate plan that would ensure that your wishes are well honored and respected, and that it will ensure that your loved ones are well taken care of at every point in time. So in terms of estate planning structures and all, so there are various estate planning structures you can embark upon. So you can be setting up a charitable trust if your objectives and your goal is to ensure that you want to make a lasting impact in the society.
Yes.
You can be setting up an endowment trust, right? So if you want to probably give back to your alma mater, you want to you have an organization that you want to ensure that you give a lasting impact that endures for generation. You can be setting up a retirement trust. So it's just like a sidebar to your RSA to ensure that even whilst is important, as long as it's important to take care of your loved ones, it's also important to take care of yourself. So you can have some funds set aside towards your retirement, being professionally managed by a trustee. You can be setting up a security trust. You can be setting up a living trust, a family trust. So there are myriads to the type of trust that you can set up, right? But everything what matters is what you want to use the trust for, what you set out to achieve. That's what informs that is what brings about the type of trust that you would set up.
Amazing. I want to say a big thank you to Faye. I want to say a big thank you to Adeleko. It's been such a great conversation. And what I would say for everyone listening, our dear directors, is first of all, end of life is not when you start thinking about estate planning or asset management. We're also in a new era where wealth generation and transfer is a very big deal. And I just want us to take time to contact Coronation Trustees, as they've said, or just think about, how do I want to actually manage my assets going forward? I especially enjoy trust because, rather than buy an asset, when my child wants it, there's a payment, so all those transfer fees, at least you're saving that at the minimum. And I remember when I was in Unilag, because you mentioned education and charity purposes, we had an award that was set up by someone who had passed a long time. But the award kept annually, it was being paid out because a trust managed that. So I'm sure that we've been educated, I've been educated, and I'm sure that anyone who needs more information can, reach out to our dear Coronation Trustees Limited. So thank you, dear directors, and we'll see you on the next episode of
as a sidebar, there's actually a study that states that people that write their will live longer.
So you heard it here. People who write a will live longer. Amazing. So this is the Directors Dialogue. It's the official podcast of the Chartered Institute of Directors Nigeria, and we say thank you for staying with us to the end. Bye.